The McDonalds grappled with profound spiritual questions. Could they reconcile their faith with loving and accepting their gay son? Their attempts to remain closeted about his sexuality strained their family and marriage as they feared the judgment of their evangelical community. Yet moments of vulnerability, Lynn battled with cancer, and Greg Jr.'s care for her challenged their beliefs. Over time, exposure to LGBTQ plus voices and progressive Christian scholars like David Gushee reshaped their views, leading to a deeper understanding of both love and scripture. This story invites critical reflection. How does a faith community's stance on LGBTQ plus issues shape family relationships? Can personal experiences lead to reinterpretation of deeply held beliefs? And what role should love and empathy play in navigating tensions between faith and identity? The story is from CNN by John Blake on November 3rd, 2024. So, Eli, my first question is coming to you. How did the McDonald's initial reaction to their son's coming out reflect broader tensions within conservative Christian communities regarding LGBTQ acceptance?
Well, so as they describe it, and the whole article kind of had this sort of atmosphere to it that was all about the parents and how their lives were different now because they found out that their son is gay, right? And it was kind of a strange thing. But what their initial reaction was, well, the dad says that his first thing he said to him was, we'll love you no matter what, but we got to fix you. And he, when it got out into the community that he was gay, his parents were hearing the same thing from other people. His dad said that one of his work relationships didn't work out because of his son being gay, and someone said you need to get a handle on your son. So as the article talked about, that's a thing that a lot of LGBTQ plus people from conservative Christian families and homes and towns go through a really, really similar story or experience. What I applaud the McDonald's for is that they did eventually take a step back and say, hey, maybe I have something wrong, maybe my beliefs aren't quite as right as I thought, and they started to re-examine that. I don't think they quite landed, as close to right as we would all hope, but I applaud them for that at least.
You mentioned the whole notion concerning fixing their son, and I believe that the article actually touched on conversion therapy, which is something that we talked about here on the nonprofits quite extensively. And I kind of want to throw this to you, Jimmy, because the parents actually sought conversion therapy as a means of fixing, quote unquote, their son. In hindsight, what are the psychological and emotional costs of practices like conversion therapy for both the individual and the family? If you can really just recall how that could be a notion that could be very, I would say, detrimental to all who happen to be involved.
Conversion therapy or trying to fix somebody who really isn't broken, I would say probably has a really profound effect on the person that is trying to be fixed or in the position to be fixed, quote unquote. This probably won't strengthen his ties with his family. It didn't in the end, but it won't make that person feel better about themselves. It just makes them feel more out of place and more broken, if you will, because this is a waste of time and waste of energy, and it's a very emotional event, I think, for people to be in this position to be fixed. It just highlights that there is something wrong with them, that there's something wrong with their life. There's something wrong with who they are, and so I think that a person in that position would suffer, but, and not that I'm sympathetic to the parents, but I think they suffer as well, because then they never get to the goal that they are set out that they've embarked on, right? They're never going to arrive at a fixing. It's always going to be a farce if they even do arrive there. But I think the harm is captured in how this article highlights the father's views of his son, saying you can be an axe murderer and we would still love you. I mean, are we comparing homosexuality to axe murderer? Is that what we're looking at? I mean, is it really that bad? Being gay is not bad, right? But let's just say in the context of having an undesirable position or life, is it as bad? I mean, do these Christian people think that being homosexual is as bad? So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Harmful.
Very harmful. And, I did have a big problem with that, Jimmy, especially, saying, oh, we still love you. You can do basically a whole bunch of serial killing and we would still love you. And I think that the issue that they had with how they were viewing what it means to be gay, and in context, because I think that you mentioned like needing more context, especially from the father, when it came to how, one is viewing another person, even if they come from them, on, should I say, okay, well, yeah, what you have chose, and I use that, very hyperbolically,
Sure.
of course, to do with your life, as far as like, how you chose to live your life, during your sexual orientation, is a problem. But at the same time, having them, as you said, being compared with something that is objectively worse, and saying that, okay, this is something that but I will still love you anyway, I would definitely think is an issue. But but at least we had like some type of redemption per se. And I would like for both of you guys to talk about that, because there was an eventual shift in the attitudes towards their gay son. And I know that, like, and I did like mention it a little bit, like, when we were first talking about, like, in the introduction, like, they did happen to get, I guess, more information. They were exposed to David Gushee and some of, his rhetoric about being, and I again, I don't know if that's like a better term, but about really just being more tolerant and actually saying that, hey, this is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So if you guys want to kind of like just like jump in and just like really just talk about like some of these other external influences that really help to shape the changing of how like the McDonalds really viewed their son and their son's sexuality, and how, in my opinion, I think made it a little bit better for both of them to actually have like a better relationship between them and their son. Eli, I would like for you to start upon that, and then Jimmy, I would like for you to do a follow-up.
Sure. So that also wasn't like the only like completely terrible attitude they had toward homosexuality, that like, like it's equitable to axe murdering. They also said things like, whose idea was it to let him take those art classes, or you didn't go camping with him or take him on enough fishing trips or play baseball with him enough as a kid, and that's why he's gay now. And it really illustrated this sort of absurd mindset they had towards homosexuality, around the time and before and even slightly after they found out that their son was gay. And they do shift later on because of these, outside influences you mentioned. They do shift to this somewhat better attitude, but it still doesn't quite land as like a feel-good story to me, because it's still looking at it as sort of like, you can love God even if your kids are gay, rather than like, hey, being gay is just regular, like just like not being gay. Like it's not, they're not shifting their attitude to it doesn't matter. They're shifting it to, well, we can love you anyway, and that's okay with God. And it doesn't quite yourself. Exactly. Like, even though you're worse of a person than all the rest of us, it still hits that way for me.
Excellent point. I think that the failure of this family is that they never established the normalcy of their son, right? Not accepting him in the first place Well, that is a failure on their part. But then the only way to accept them is to kind of reach out to other parents who are also struggling. You know, when the struggle is really not theirs, the struggle is for the person who's trying to fit in with a community, a society, a family that doctrinally rejects him. And so I wrote a note here, which I have to highlight because it's kind of hilarious because I have a typo and I have no idea what I was trying to say. So I said, so many people treat these struggles as their own when they are the ones serial the actual struggle. So, you know, I don't know how the word serial got in there, but I know what I was trying to say. And that is, don't pretend that your son is not the one that's struggling and try and cry, poor me. The reason, and even though there is a shift at the end where they do kind of come around to not ostracize him or reject him outright, I'll say that I'll take it in a sense, but really what this does for me is highlight the overarching problem that religion plays for society, right? So doctrinally, like I said, you've got this group of people that just is brought up and spews and allows hate to just continue to exist by being a catalyst for it until it happens to them. And then they have to go, oh, crap. And I made a note about, again, about the Salem witch trials. Everybody was burning everybody, right? Especially the women, mostly the women, until the judge and a couple of other high-ranking people in the Salem witch trials, kids were accused. And then it was, oh, this isn't real anymore. We can't allow spectral evidence in court. And so people have to change when they are confronted with kind of their own BS. And so in the end, I think I'll take it. It's like the march towards spirituality where people say, well, I'm not religious anymore. I'm just spiritual. Okay. I guess I'll take it because at least you're not adhering to a really hateful religion and it's a progression away from it. But, another thing I want to highlight real quick is that this highlights the abuses of women by churches as well. So, you know, somebody that they had gone to for help had explained that having a domineering mother can have this impact on men to be, I guess, homosexuals. It always comes down to the woman, doesn't it? They always find a way to blame women. So, yeah, there's just a lot of problems with religion, problems that or stories like this highlight them, even if it looks like there's a happy ending.
As the sitting woman on this panel with also a child whining in the background, sorry about that. Touche. You know, I find it like, I don't want to call it necessarily ironic, but I find it like definitely problematic that this particular story just highlights like a lot of the different issues that we have with biases and also church rhetoric when it comes to how we are viewing people that's around us that happen to be different. If they don't necessarily like settle into the societal norms, like being cisgender, heterosexual, then it's a problem, right? And I know that the church, along with their rhetoric, even though like that we have very little passages in the Bible that talks really about like, you know, sexual orientation. And if you actually talk to some of the most preeminent scholars in the Bible, when we're thinking about some of the scriptures that may seem that they're talking against homosexuality, we find that the context is very different than what we actually think when actually it's being interpreted as, correct? So I feel really for, you know, the son, and even though that I applaud the efforts a bit from the parents when it comes to them being able to kind of leapfrog over their own indoctrination when it comes to how, you know, gay people are talked about. As you said, Jimmy, that problem is still there. Do you all feel, and I would love for you guys to chime in about this, do you feel that the church holds some responsibility on how we actually are looking at, you know, gay people, people who happen to be in the queer queer community on whole. Because remember, and especially like nowadays, and as of recent events, we know that queer people, especially trans people, are very much so under attack. And it's not just like, from, this one person who says they don't like you, or this third person doesn't say is like you. I mean, like, it's actually becoming policy now, right? And we know that a lot of these particular sensibilities have come from faith-based institutions. So what is the church actually, what is the church's role play into actually helping to maybe reformulate some of the rhetoric that is out and about on a societal whole? And is there any, and do we have even seen them possibly, because we did have a David Gushee, I guess, but do we see this as a possibility of a change agent in the church in general to be able to say, maybe the way that we are talking about the queer community is unjust and we need to change it? Eli, I would like for you to start, and then Jimmy, I'd like for you to follow up.
I'm not sure if I think it necessarily would go that way. I think there's a chance that if it sort of depends on where the majority sits, I guess. If you have a majority of, congregations or churches or denominations starting to affirm, LGBTQ plus people, as they call it, there was previously doctrines to sort of be accepting of them, and now it's moving more towards being affirming of them, and sort of because I was saying sort of the way that I was saying this ministry that McDonald's have started didn't do. This ministry they've started is more along the lines of accepting and just tolerating, as sort of like a passive tolerance rather than an affirming acceptance and love. I think it is equally likely that now that if they start to see the ability to, if they start to feel emboldened going into the future, these religious groups, I mean, there's a chance that they might start to be more restrictive of LGBTQ plus people again, and be less accepting and less affirming, because they feel like they can get away with it more now, and they don't have to appease to whatever, parties that they might not want to appease to anymore. Now they don't have to. I think it's just as likely that it could go either way. I'm not really sure which one I expect.
The church is absolutely responsible for the way that LGBTQ community and LGBTQ people are treated. The church is nothing more than a power structure. It is not some miraculous supernatural thing that has anything to do with a deity. This is a completely man-made institution that people use to climb to the top. And when they get to the top positions, they are in control. They're in control of societies. They're in control of society's wealth, because they collect it from people, because they make them feel guilty and fearful their entire lives. And those people then turn and pay them to fix it. Okay. The church feels that the LGBTQ community, at least going back to where we have a more traditional idea of Christianity and the church, feels that the LGBTQ outlook is a challenge to this power structure, because then it negates what's in the Bible, and then it causes people to tear down the argument that the church makes for its legitimacy. The church cannot coexist with the LGBTQ community and still maintain its credibility, maintain its accuracy. However, what we see nowadays is that churches more and more are making exceptions for LGBTQ people, because the court of public opinion is saying that LGBTQ people should not be mistreated and should not be othered. And the church in general, I mean, multiple factions of Christianity are losing money, losing participation, losing their congregation, and they are making changes in order to maintain their power. And that is all that's happening. They're absolutely to blame for perpetuating this lie about LGBTQ people and not fixing their own internal problems, where forced homosexuality is currently at play. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with homosexuality. I do think there is something wrong with an adult forcing it on a minor, which we know happens by the tens of thousands every year across the world, probably a higher number than that. Yesterday, the Archbishop of Canterbury in the Anglican Church resigned because it came to light that they had been covering up child abuse for decades. And he says he's stepping down because it was grossly mismanaged. No, you're stepping down because you got caught. That's why you're stepping down. And so the church has a responsibility to clean up its own act and stop pointing the finger at other people who are not doing anything wrong except challenging their incredibly extremist and archaic views. That's my view on that.
That's your point, and you're sticking to it.
Yeah.
Well, I as a former Anglican person, I would say that we will cover that story that you mentioned, Jimmy, about the Archbishop of Canterbury. Just a little bit. It wasn't necessarily the Archbishop of Canterbury. He actually was covering up for one of the lawyers that turned to a priest who was sexually abusing boys and young men, also not only in England, but also in African countries of Zimbabwe and South Africa.
That's right.
Yeah, and he's been doing it since 1984. So we'll talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, dear viewer, want to hear us talk about other things, click here.